Everyone, welcome to Medical Cannabis Guidelines presented by Dr. Brooke Worster and Greg Garber. My name's Karen Costello. I'm Senior Director for the Helpline and Lead Navigation Strategies here at Cancer Support Community, and I'll be moderating this session. Before I introduce our speakers, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, this session is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the event. However, continuing education credits can only be available for viewing after the event. However, continuing education credits can only be earned by attending this live session. If you wish to receive a continuing education credit from participating in this session, you must complete an online evaluation form, and the link to which you'll be made available will be at the end of day one of the symposium. If you would like to ask a question during this presentation, please do so using the Q&A feature in Zoom. While some questions may be addressed during this session, we'll do our best to address all remaining comments and questions during the QA session at the end of the presentation. To turn on closed captions, please click on the CC button on the Zoom toolbar. Now I would like to introduce our presenters. A pioneering palliative care clinician and researcher, Dr. Brooke Worster is the Director of the Division of Supportive Oncology and the Medical Director of Cannabis Medicine for the Science and Business Master's Program at Jefferson Health. Greg Garber is the Director of Oncology Support Services at the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center at Jefferson Health. So please welcome our speakers, Dr. Brooke Worster and Greg Garber.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all so much for having us. Happy to be here. We are excited to talk with you guys about medical cannabis and kind of the state of the science and where we are and how to guide patients in a kind of muddy space that lacks a lot of sort of research and educational clarity. We have the disclosure that we work with a company called EO Care, which is a cannabis-related guidance company. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of an overview of what is medical cannabis even, and like understanding kind of the nomenclature and all of that. And then some common concerns from patients. Also prevalence and risks of use, especially risks without kind of us engaging in the conversations with patients and giving guidance, and then guidance and some resources. And please feel free to ask questions as we go. I know everybody says this and it's impossible, but we'd love to have it be interactive as possible over Zoom. So I'll take this one. What the heck is cannabis? And you hear all of these words, marijuana, hemp, all of this. So the easiest way to think about it is that cannabis is truly kind of the genus and species name or genus of what a plant is, right? So it is a flowering plant that has 3 different sort of species in it. So that's where you hear cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and we will talk a little bit more about the myths and truths surrounding those. And then a third part of this genus is a different kind of area of the plant that serves much more in the hemp space, and even is like clothing and ropes for a lot of shipping things. So that's the more scientific name to call it cannabis. Where in the world did marijuana come from? That actually stems from sort of, and outside of this purview of this talk, but kind of long-standing kind of socio-political trappings around this entity. But in reality, it's defined by the federal government under US law as any cannabis plant that has more than 0.3% by dry weight of Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC, right? That's the part that you all kind of know of that gets you high, quote unquote, right? So the main psychoactive component. And that's where the line has been drawn in the sand. Anything with less than that is deemed hemp by the federal government. Cannabidiol or CBD is a part of the plant, and that is sort of prevalent in any of those names, right? In any of the plants, it can be any amount in any of them. Cannabinoids are chemical compounds that are in the plant, right? It's a plant. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of what we call phytocannabinoids in the plant. The two that we talk about and that we have the most data on are THC and CBD. But I'm sure you guys have started to hear, because the more and more cannabis kind of gains mainstream momentum, you hear about like CBG and THCA. All of those are other what we call phytocannabinoids, or parts of the plant. Like Camilla? So this is why there is a lot of medical potential behind cannabis as a plant, is something called your endocannabinoid system. It is a very widespread system of receptors that are highly dense in your central nervous system, as well as in your periphery. You can see the sort of two colors of greenish here, the dots of where these CB1 and CB2 receptors are. It is a system in our body that is complicated in that it interweaves with other systems. So for instance, what the hell do I mean? It isn't affecting any symptoms or sort of diseases itself, but it does interweave and modulate how you sense pain through your pain system, or how you sense nausea and vomiting through, in your central nervous system, something that's called your vomit center, or what your anxiety and mood is through kind of the levels of gabapentin and serotonin and others in your CNS. So it is a modulatory system. And we, as humans, produce what is called endocannabinoids, or things in our body that mirror that same chemical structure that exists in the plant. And so there are physiologic reasons why the cannabis plant can have medical therapeutic benefits. This also mirrors a little bit of the way that I want you to think about opioids, right? So we have an endogenous opioid system, and we make things that look chemically the same to morphine. There's also a lot of risks with unchecked use of opioids, right? This isn't the same, but think about it in that way, is that it still requires a lot of understanding, research, and guidance. You want to talk through something?
Sure.
Okay.
So, as many of you probably know, cannabis is federally illegal still, and has been for quite some time. This current map is the state-by-state picture of who has what kind of programs, with the green being adult use, or anyone over 21 can buy. The yellow having medical programs where you need to be certified by a healthcare practitioner, depends on the state what that is. And red is really kind of either low THC or no THC and CBD. And so that really not kind of meeting those criteria. The white states are, there's nothing. The complexion of this has changed and changed and changed over the years, and we're right on the verge of cannabis being rescheduled from a currently Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug. Schedule 1 drugs being drugs for which there's really no determined medical purpose, and Schedule 3 drugs being things that we see, like anabolic steroids and codeine number, Tylenol 3, and other things like that. From a patient standpoint, might not be the most huge change in this field. However, will create access in states where there is not access. We don't know the mechanism for that yet necessarily, but it will make a big difference in terms of research and future areas of discovery and grants and things like that.
And this is confusing to look at, right? It's a patchwork of differences. And what that means for you guys as clinicians is that it's confusing to figure out what's what around you, and it changes with legislative changes in your state. And that means it's as confusing, if not more, for your patients to know how to navigate this space, right? So depending on where you are, it looks very different. Okay. So here we go. Poll number 1. So what is your primary concern when considering medical cannabis for patients? I don't. That's the question. Right. Yeah, I agree. Camilla, you want to end this? Guys, I apologize. Camilla, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in here. I'm not sure how to read that either. If you're seeing frequently, occasionally, rarely, and never, I don't know if you have concerns, I apologize. I didn't personally craft this poll question. Let's skip that. I apologize. Let's go to the next slide, Camilla. So here are concerns that we hear all the time from patients and providers. If you want to tackle it from the patient side, I'll talk about it.
For sure. I mean, it kind of patients walking into this world, it's a kind of a very confusing landscape, and it's actually gotten more, not less confusing as products have proliferated, and there are CBD shops everywhere and advertisements on social media, states with both medical and adult use programs. And if anybody has ever kind of been in a dispensary, like a vast variety of choice, there are a number of different laws. The federal law is illegal. The federal government said a number of years ago, we're not going to ask, just do your thing. And each state did their thing, which can look like very different things. Products that patients are buying in a licensed dispensary are legally regulated. Those are tested for components of the cannabis plant, as well as toxins, routinely and kind of very safe. They're also labeled with what is in them. If you go into a freestanding cannabis store, that's like the supplement market. They're kind of can vary a tremendous amount from nothing to a whole lot to something different. So can you get in trouble legally? Theoretically, yes, you can, because all states are a little bit different with this. Some have decriminalized cannabis, some have not. Some people still can go to jail for this. There are fewer of those, and some cannot. Yeah. And each state has its own rules. In practice, in our experience, and we've probably seen about 5,000 patients, we've not seen anyone get into actual legal trouble, but we're sitting in Philadelphia, which is a fairly progressive city.
You as a clinician cannot get in trouble. Oh, can you go to them? You can do the next one, that's fine. Cannot get in trouble for having the conversation, recommending, guiding, any of that. That has been established in federal court system, actually. So that is one of the legal concerns that you have. Certainly it's different in terms of health systems and funding, but this is all one of the good things about kind of this impending rescheduling. The biggest concern from my perspective, and I imagine yours in a lot of way, is there's just not a ton of research that is really well done to anchor us in who's going to benefit from this, who has the highest risk, where do I need to kind of be more worried or less worried, and what are the things to even look out for, right? So there's some of it, and it's not great. A lot of the studies are done outside of the United States, and they are observational because of the federal kind of statutes right now. We have federally funded kind of multi-site trials ongoing right now, looking at various parts of cannabis and cancer patient use, but it's observational, right? And that line has been drawn in the sand kind of very, very thickly. I think that will be a good change.
So the other piece of that is the question that often gets asked is, what should I take for what?
Yeah.
And which is, we're very far away from answering that question with kind of current research. We're making kind of educated, informed guesses, if you will. And so to be able to do like a randomized control trial, like this, the standard in medicine, we aren't doing that. We're using experience, we're using some knowledge from research, we're using kind of clinical experience to make recommendations, which is one of the most, you don't go into a pharmacy and say to the pharmacist, you know, my blood pressure is a little high today. What do you think I should take?
Yeah.
Um,
So this is another kind of important thing that both sides of the patient and provider coin worry about, right? Again, we're getting at this, like, is this going to hurt me? Does it matter which form I use, which composition I use? Is it going to interact with other medications? And all of these are complex in that, go back to kind of how I mentioned the endocannabinoid system, right? It's not a static yes or no. Some of them are, right? So some of them we can say for sure this will have a drug interaction or not, and there's ways to check that. But like, will it impact my physical health? Will it make a difference in what I'm using in the ratio? And like that fluctuates based on what's going on with your body, with your illness, with your other medicines. And so that's why this guidance, we keep harking on this, but the guidance matters. And the one thing that all kind of recommendations and professional society guidelines about cannabis that have come out very clearly to say is that we need to make this an open dialogue, right? So we need to take away the stigma. We need to be able to have the conversation so that we can start with the guidance. Yeah, Karen, are there questions? We'd love to sort of pause if there are some coming in that work now.
So I have one at this point. It says, if my memory serves, CBD isn't regulated and you can go from one store to the next and the level of THC varies vastly. How do you ensure people that they can access legitimate products?
Fantastic question, and you are spot on. It's not regulated in the way that we think of pharmacologic products regulated.
Right, and so you're kind of left as if you were kind of buying a supplement to see if something has been made using good manufacturing processes and if there have been certificates of analysis on this. And there are kind of good sources and many more bad sources of buying CBD. Additionally, as where there's a will, there's a way. They have found ways to extract higher amounts of THC from hemp. And so you now have hemp-based products that have significant amounts of THC, equaling those of some you may find in a dispensary.
Very practically, two ways that you can help your patient know that what they're getting is what it says it is, because studies have shown that it's very unreliable what's on the label. So we need to do some digging beyond that. One is, if you live in a state, or if the patient is in a state where there is a state regulated program, the dispensaries are required to have testing and a certificate of analysis so that like what it is on the label, it says it is, if it's a state regulated dispensary. The other that is, especially for cancer patients and a lot of people, but maybe a little more kind of disease friendly and not having to go into a dispensary or step through that if that feels intimidating or not a good experience for a lot of people, is that there are a lot of ways that you can order these products online, and the reputable companies have two things that Greg mentioned, and they will note it, and it will be prominently displayed on the screen for every order. And one is called GMP. They will have a GMP certificate, and that means good manufacturing processes, and it will be GMP for every ingredient and GMP for the final product, right? They should have that for you. And the other is a certificate of analysis, something that says that we got this tested at an external lab and it is what we're telling you it is. Those two things at least are some measure of reliability. So this is kind of exactly what we were talking about. We are right in the thick of this. Like, if you guys are interested in cannabis or it being therapeutic for your patients potentially, like now is as hot of a time as ever, in terms of the pathway to drug rescheduling is years. And like none of us paid attention to go really years back when this started. We are now like 7, 8 years into the process, and we are at the last stage where there already has been the recommendation that it gets shifted and the like final kind of judicial hearing is scheduled. It is recommended to be rescheduled to a Schedule 3. Now, you said it very well, like what will this look like for patients?
Right, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it probably for patients in states without access, there will need to be some mechanism to provide access. We really don't know what that looks like. For patients who are used to walking into adult use and medical dispensaries, it will not look awfully different. Should be very much the same. One thing, and this is from a business standpoint, you know, cannabis is federally illegal. So the cannabis business has, businesses have a tremendously high financial burden where they pay tax from $1 of revenue. It's not like a normal business where you can write off your rent and you can write off your labor expenses and other things. From $1, they pay tax on that. The other thing is, since it's all state by state, if there's a product that you like that you bought while you were in California, and then you want to get that same product in Pennsylvania, that manufacturer has to build another manufacturing and grow plant in Pennsylvania. And so there, you know, from a patient perspective, there could be some considerable downward pressure on price, which we need.
And immediately the change in a research perspective will be profound, right? It will no longer be illegal, technically, for me to do interventional or randomized controlled trials looking at cannabis. I have to get a special license that is attached to a specific protocol now, and sort of lots and lots and lots of steps that make it really hard. And you have to get it from a licensed grower that doesn't mirror what's out and what we want to look at. So all of those trappings will go away, which is great.
Yes.
Because clinical research, we know, is sort of the backbone of this and has an impact on health. Now, that pathway is long, right? Think about just the pathway for a new drug development, right? We'll get there. That'll take longer, but that doesn't mean we won't start to see and be able to garner guidance more rapidly than we would otherwise. So this is a very good thing in my mind, from a research and ultimately education perspective, and also for just the stigma of it, right? Like,
yeah.
We in all of us in this psychosocial oncology world are it matters. There are a lot of longstanding, especially racial discrimination around cannabis, that if we can remove some of that stigma, like, man, that's a good thing for our patients to sort of start at step one and be able to have those conversations without people feeling like they're going to be policed or lose benefits, because that happened right in our history. So acknowledging that and creating a different space is helpful.
I mean, we see it in clinic. We've had a certification clinic for a number of years now. And one of our questions is like, kind of tell us about your experience with cannabis. And it gets such an interesting reaction, and people will like get quiet, or they'll look down, or they'll look struck. And we're like, no. We really are just interested. It kind of tells us a starting point. It helps us understand where the educational opportunities are, and then people settle down. But that first reaction is really telling. And as much as we've done to destigmatize this, it is still there. And so people even inquiring about it, like the stigma stops that.
We know there's actually differences based on age and race about how often people even feel comfortable asking about it. So go ahead. Thank you. It's happening, guys. It is, I promise it's happening, and there's more out there than you think it is. It doesn't look like what we know to be true in terms of kind of triple negative breast cancer, very defined pathways for dosing and everything, but it's a lot better than it was. And I'll tell you right now, I'm a beneficiary of it. The federal government is changing how it funds research on this. It used to be that you had to have a trial that looked at the harms only. And now they are funding as much, if not more, saying, help us understand the benefits here, help us understand the perceptions. So the space of cancer specific, right, is that we know there's a couple facets to this. Like there is data that supports improved control of refractory cancer pain, especially in vulnerable populations like older adults where a lot of the meds like NSAIDs and others just aren't that safe or tolerable. Along those lines, kind of the prolonged neuropathic side effects of chemotherapy, migraine pains, all of that. Two of the sort of best data spaces are, without a doubt, number one is chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, right? Like it can be absolutely miserable for those people that just don't respond to kind of the standard ondansetron and prochlorperazine and all that. There is a very direct relationship between THC, frankly, and reductions in perception of nausea in what's called your, not eloquently termed your vomit center in your brain. So that's a very good target. The appetite stimulation, it's really actually grown out of lack of other good options, right? Like steroids are really the only other thing out there. And we all know the side effects of steroids in long-term especially aren't great. Anxiety is, we need more data, and it looks like it's primarily driven by CBD, which we see problems because that's not what's on the marketplace or what people are picking, but it is real that this can be an option in the toolkit.
Well, we see patients in Pennsylvania, patients need to be recertified annually. And so while we certainly have communication with them between that, for patients who are kind of just seeing us annually, we always ask kind of what did you end up using and what are you using it for? You started out using it for neuropathy, and kind of interesting feedback is people are using it for anxiety or to relax. They're using it for nausea. Some are using it for pain. Others are using topical products, which have been kind of very popular for patients who do not want to ingest something. So it's a little bit all over the board. And sleep. Jury's out on that too, but people seem to like it for sleep.
And I get it that we in traditional Western medicine need to do a better job of acknowledging that patient preference in the ways that we can honor it matters, right? So there are a growing proportion of our patients that we see and patients in our studies that say, I don't want to use more pills. I feel like I'm chasing the next side effect of the pill with the pill. And so there are options in thinking about a non pharmacologic approach to this. And that's a little bit of where the cannabis kind of, I think, appeal for some people comes in. So having honest conversations about what the possibility is, what the potential and what the risks are matters, right? Because it's not a panacea. It's not going to fix everything, but it's also not, the worst thing by any means. And there are some ways that it can be helpful.
The one thing that I don't know if we've stated yet, but we really do need to state, there is no evidence in people that cannabis will have an active anti-disease effect on cancer. So that is not that is a discussion that we have. If people ask, we will say, look, it would be wonderful, but like, this is not where we are. It may help with some symptoms and side effects, but it is not a cancer treatment.
So this is real. And as we are garnering more, as use is increasing, and the research behind it is increasing, and also actually the free market has caused a proliferation of very potent formulations. It is a real risk benefit analysis. And the way that you can do so much better for patients is actually by guiding them. We know that smoking and lighting anything on fire and inhaling it into your body is not medically advised. And so getting people away from thinking they have to smoke a joint is important because there are other formulations. And CBD, interestingly, has, fantastic anti-inflammatory properties that sort of is a vascular protective mechanism. And at higher doses, there is some concern that patients that are getting cancer treatment with immunotherapy, there may be some interplay there, right? We don't know for sure yet, but it bears sort of the conversation and guidance in terms of how much are you using and how are you using it. As people are using it more, we are seeing more risks because they're using very potent, and when we say potent, we mean, like, let's just make it honest, the very high THC. That's the risk of that, the manic episodes, psychotic episodes, cannabis use disorder, sort of developing that.
It's dose related, yes. There is certainly some connection between onset of manic or psychotic episodes and cannabis. It doesn't make people psychotic, but there is some relationship, a little horse cart right now, but that's been shown kind of over and over again, whether people had a genetic proclivity already or something else happened. It is something to pay attention to.
And especially you guys that are in the AYA space, we know that the developing brain is more susceptible to sort of any form of, fill in the blank use disorder. Cannabis is no different. So sort of having that conversation about, and it can be very helpful, right? And how are we using this and how are we guiding them? All right, let's hope this one's the right stuff. Go ahead, guys. Here's poll number 2. In your clinical experience, how often do patients inquire about medical cannabis as a treatment option? Now it makes sense.
Yeah, that lines up.
Cool.
Great.
All right.
Yeah.
Share results. There you go. Whoops, stop sharing. Okay. So occasionally, right? I get it. 54% are occasionally. It's all over the board there, but oh yeah, I see. I'm happy to have questions, Karen, if people want to ask questions or put them in the Q&A or.
Yeah, if I don't have any new questions in the Q&A.
Oh, someone raised their hand. Sorry, I didn't know.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Please feel free to take yourself off mute and ask the question.
Maybe that was an accident.
It could have been applause too.
Oh, all right, all right.
We've had some very nice comments in the chat, not necessarily questions, but statements and affirmations.
Patients are using this, guys, right? They are. And I think we touched a little bit about, the stigma and the concern of either angering a medical professional, getting in trouble, doing all the stuff, people aren't always comfortable asking about it.
Yeah, and they're not always comfortable talking to their care teams about it either. And for some things, like depression, where there really is no evidence that cannabis can be helpful for that, and lots of very evidence-based treatments for depression, like that's worrisome. And so we've got, a little bit of the Wild West out there with a lot of people using this and not a lot of people having any kind of structure or guidance around that. And not to be necessarily paternalistic about this, but there's some peril and there's also cost. Patients who are kind of going out and trying to get relief, it's expensive. And so to kind of go from thing to thing, and have to go back and buy more and more, it is a very costly trial and error.
Especially in a space where financial toxicity in cancer patients is very real, right? So in a very large kind of study looking at just primary care patients across the board, 17% were using it regularly. In a cancer population, we did a national survey looking at cancer patients and found that across states, didn't actually matter if you had a legal program or not. Over a quarter of your cancer patients are saying they are actively using cannabis or have used it at some point to manage, symptoms or side effects associated with cancer or cancer treatment. So, that's a good amount. When we think about how many of our patients are on antidepressants or anxiolytics, like this is way more, right? So it bears our attention.
there was a question about the difference between medical dispensaries and regular dispensaries. And thank you, Ashley. We throw all this stuff around interchangeably, and so a medical dispensary is in a state where medical cannabis has been approved and where you need some kind of certification from a medical provider. And I'll give you Pennsylvania as an example. Pennsylvania, you need to be a physician. You go through a certain, like I think 4 hours of online training. You get listed on a registry, and you can certify that a patient could benefit from medical cannabis. And there are a list of, I don't know, 23 or so conditions, many of which are not evidence-based. A legislator had a parent with some condition and they wanted that to got benefit and they wanted that to be on it. Other states like Virginia, we're working with a group down there, and Virginia just needs like a doctor's note. You need a medical provider to write on a piece of paper with your name, and they have to be registered with the state that you're appropriate for medical cannabis. You take that to a dispensary and they register you. And so if you think about this from like I'm always thinking kind of about health equity, like they're very different kind of hurdles in every different state. And to a lot of states' credits, this has been simplified a bit. Like states are mainly interested in not creating further barriers. A lot of states are, I shouldn't say all, but we've been witness to that over time. Recreational dispensaries are like a liquor store. You walk in, you show ID, and you can buy products. The difference is they're taxed. Most medical dispensaries, most states don't tax medical cannabis. Recreational cannabis can be taxed
a good amount.
Very amount, up to 30%.
Yeah. So for instance, like we're sitting in Philadelphia right now. If I drove over the bridge to New Jersey, I don't have a medical card as a patient, but I could walk into one of those recreational dispensaries. In reality, aside from those hurdles, they look exactly the same. It's not like a medical dispensary is a pharmacy and a rec dispensary is like a pot shop. They look like the same darn thing. And a lot of them in states where it has both adult use and medical, it's literally like you walk in the door and it says like medical to this side,
right.
and it's like you're queuing up in a line at
And the same person at the end of that line sometimes as well. Yes.
So from a financial toxicity perspective, that's one of the biggest things is the tax on it. Go ahead, Camille. So here, we talked about this, just to reiterate that like most of your patients aren't asking you, and it has nothing to do with you. Every one of you are lovely, engaging, humanistic providers. It has to do with all of the longstanding kind of systemic stuff behind this. And the fact that we don't think of it very sort of highly on in our checklist of what to ask about to patients, right? Like if at all, most intake stuff or even patient assessment still puts cannabis under the like substance use question, right? So 40% of all cancer patients and caregivers seek it at some point during or after treatment, and about 9% of them got any sort of guidance from a medical professional. And I'm not throwing dispensary workers under the bus here. They're doing their job as a retail, counter person. They aren't meant to be the person that matches kind of the medical education with the use. So that's just the default of what it is right now.
And it's not an unwillingness. When we started our clinic, we have maybe 45 or 50 medical oncologists here. There was really no resistance to this. People were like, well, thank God somebody can answer questions and help patients with this, because patients are asking.
And most medical professionals are supportive or curious about the benefits of this. Most of them don't know anything about it because we were taught nothing other than like, it's a gateway drug, or, it is a substance of abuse type thing for a half an hour in one of our psychiatry lectures. So go ahead.
Good.
We harked on this. I think, this is where we can make the difference. Routinely and non-judgmentally inquire about patient use or consideration of it. That's what you can do tomorrow. To start making a difference. And in a very, I'm sometimes a very concrete human that wants to walk away from a talk with like, all right, how am I going to change my practice? If you're interested, that's it. That's the way that you can universally start changing this, is that you just ask or you talk about it in an open and non-judgmental way, right?
Absolutely.
The next thing is like garner a small amount of resources to, you can go ahead, Camilla, to be able to guide patients when they say, oh yeah, I want to know. So then you're not left being like, oh, shit, I don't know, right? So here we go. There's a lot of issues with giving that guidance in real time. Drug interactions are real, and there are calculators online that you can put in the medications and you can see. There isn't standardized evidence-based guidelines for this dose of this one is what we need. And then time, it's like, how do you get to everything? We get it. We're very kind of much realists.
Okay.
All right, last poll.
Yeah.
Guys, if I can remove any stigma right here, I now am like fully immersed in this. We sort of jumped in the deep end when it came to Pennsylvania, and I promise you, had someone asked me this question
Yep.
3 weeks before that, I would have said not familiar at all. Like, it's not something that is taught to us, is a part of our
Yep.
education, is right. It is just not. So
I remember when we were about to start our clinic, the person from Epic, our electronic health record, came and said, all right, so we're going to put a note together for you guys to use in your clinic. What do you want to ask? And we like kind of looked at each other. We're
Yeah.
like, okay, do they use marijuana? What else should we ask? You know,
It's
so
evolved.
but that was, you know, we've evolved from them. We use the same note actually, but
We've evolved it.
we've evolved it a
grown.
bit, but
Go ahead, Mel. I don't know if you want to talk about this.
yeah.
This is sort of the kind of ongoing issue of how do we do this? And one of the platforms that we have started working with is this entity, EO, that helps give guidance in a space where people are kind of questioning it. You can see a lot of groups that have said like, we want to help guide people, and we want to kind of harm reduce and kind of collect data about this. So it's out there, it's growing, and again, we can share resources with you guys that are interested. And you know, certainly from stuff like this to, you know, our clinic note that's evolved.
Yeah.
You know, I think it matters to sort of have that conversation. So go ahead. These are the things that by and large people know about, right? They walk into the dispensary. This cannabis concierge doctor or like pot doc, this is where patients get certified because there's some ad or they can Google it. And it's usually kind of a 5-minute Zoom conversation where the person says, great, here you go. They might do a really good job and they might just give access to the card. They're not easy to come by for the general population, and they're expensive.
And and so there's been some modulation in that over time, but very early on in programs, there's a real exploitation that happens where, you know, patients are going to a doctor who is maybe sometimes even known to them, but they're charging the visit outside of a regular office visit. You don't go pay just a copay, you're getting charged hundreds of dollars. Some humanity has happened a little bit in the interim, and you know, many states have kind of waived certification fees for people who are on public assistance or a variety of different other PACE and prescription programs and housing programs and things like that, which has been progressive and good to see.
Yeah. And I think this is always what I say when I'm giving talks to clinicians, is that it's crazy to me to think that any of us would ever say, you know, I don't know, pick whichever antidepressant you want, go ahead and try it, let me know, or maybe just have at it. Here's a prescription for Lyrica, or here's the prescription for oxycodone, like, best of luck, right? We would never do that. And in a lot of ways, not because people don't care, but because they just don't know, they say, sure, try it, right? And that's it. And so, you know, you kind of put the onus on patients in that way if we're not giving them some kind of help.
So Brooke and Greg, I do have some questions. Oh, good. Look at that. Perfect timing.
There you go.
A bunch came in at once, and I think I'll try to I'll ask you them. Because one of them I think is answered by a comment you just made, but maybe you can elaborate. So, after we ask the question about marijuana use, then what recommendations can we make directly to patients? I guess it's what's your next steps?
So wait, the question is, if a patient asks, what can you do?
Exactly. If they ask about it, what's
Okay.
your recommendation to them directly?
So great question. I'm a big fan of being curious first, and I think those of you in the psychosocial oncology world probably are on a daily
We may
basis.
share that, we might.
Right, so it shouldn't feel so far outside of your comfort zone, is to say, tell me more, right? Like, what are you interested in using it for? Or are you, or kind of what are you hoping for? Because it's a very different conversation if someone says, I want to cure my GBM with high dose vitamin C and CBD, versus I'm really struggling with anxiety at night and sleep, and like my neighbor or my so-and-so told me this could be helpful, or I want to use it, right? So the former is kind of helping them come to a place where we know is safer and this isn't helpful. The latter, you have a couple options, right? So build your professional network to resources that are around you. If anyone is around us, you can reach out to us anytime. There's other people like us. We're not the only ones. It's few and far between, but the other thing that is real and is frankly the reason why we got it when we met EO is that online resources are there and they're real, and sort of guiding people to that is a real accessible way for patients to get both guidance and products, and not just walk in to a pot shop or go to, Dr. Google, which we often, we all hate that. So that would be my recommendation. The other thing that exists, just so you know, is there are other entities that have some beginnings of guidance around at least what would it be helpful for, or what sort of kind of rules to follow in terms of knowing quality and dosing and things like that. ASCO came out with some guidelines recently. There's an education platform on the EO site where you can ask that. So you can kind of think about any of those things. The other thing I always tell people is, in your own state, your state has a website that it maintains that has a lot of the specifics for your state, inclusive of maybe how do patients get access. And so your own state's cannabis website, like Pennsylvania medical marijuana is always what I Google, because they call it marijuana here for sure, but that's another option. I don't know if you have any other.
No, I think that's good. Often state websites are very good, and you have to poke around a bit. There is certainly some good information out there and there are schools like accredited universities and others who have started, programs for people interested in this. So you can find educational resources. Pennsylvania's site is decent, but I'm always kind of looking at them, and that's usually the best way to understand what each state is doing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So we have a couple related questions if you feel like we can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
So two related questions, I think. Since there's no dosing requirements, will it ever be possible for licensed clinicians, not just MDs, DOs, to request a card for a patient?
Oh,
It is now.
It is now. You can request a card. I mean, I guess maybe the question is actually, could you be the one to certify a patient to do it? I mean, yeah, sure. I think that is all, again, a legislative thing that probably doesn't make a ton of sense per se. I think anyone, social workers, marriage and family therapists, kind of all of you clinicians that are seeing and treating people and would have these conversations with them, you can guide them and you can help them get access, and you can give them sort of good recommendations, right? Even generically or very specifically, whether it's working with an EO platform or something like that. You can say, like, if we're talking about anxiety here, what you need to look for is low dose THC. And if we're talking about oral ingestion, like 2.5 milligrams, right? Not high, stuff like that. You can say that. I don't know how much kind of aptitude there is state by state to broaden who can actually do the like certifying for cards.
NPs in some states, pharmacists, PAs, MDs, DOs, it's incredibly variable. And in states where there's adult use, you can kind of just walk in. But the guidelines are, I mean, most folks who are kind of naive to cannabis, we just don't want them to have a terrible experience out of the gate. You know, nobody if you haven't taken any cannabis product before, taking a 30 milligram or a 50 milligram gummy is not your good starting point. And unfortunately, that happens more often than we would like. And then you get somebody who's really feeling terrible and paranoid and anxious, and that's awful. And then you've just kind of lost an opportunity for something to potentially be helpful. And so we want to avoid that to the extent possible.
And again, like very basic guidelines, like how are you using it?
Yeah.
Right. And if someone says I'm smoking a joint, you can say, have you thought about or have you tried any other forms? There are like a lot of people just don't even know, right? There are a lot of other forms out there that might be helpful and, you know, give you less cough or sore throat or kind of some health concerns that we know about. You know, whatever you feel professionally comfortable about, I don't think it's out of bounds.
Yes.
And especially if we're talking about something that has to do with mental health or sort of that conversation in your therapeutic alliance, go for it, man. I'm all about everybody practicing at the highest kind of level for their licensure.
Okay, great. I think the two remaining questions are similar, so you might not have to deep dive. We have about 5 minutes left in our session, but I want to make sure we do, vocalize what here is in the Q&A. So how would you advise counseling professionals to approach these conversations versus medical professionals? And for example, are there differences in what can and should be discussed based on your professional background, which of course you've dealt with a little bit, but maybe if you have anything else to elaborate there.
If you're seeing a patient in therapy, like how would you
tell
me how you talk about it?
So it's interesting. So I think symptomatically, if somebody, I ask about, drug and alcohol use, unless it's really problematic, I'm not really interested in it. But from a symptom standpoint, I just literally had a patient. I have a small private practice. I'm a clinical social worker as well. And I saw a new patient a couple of nights ago, young woman, early 40s with triple-negative breast cancer, who has, I mean, literally not slept more than 2 or 3 hours a night in months. And like, this is her presenting issue. She's overwrought. She's tearful. Has like her attention span is short. She's short with her kids, and it really kind of highly distressed. And like I'm thinking and she's taking a boatload of melatonin, and she's taking Benadryl and Ativan, and none of it is working. And so I said, are you receptive to trying cannabis? Like, I asked her about that. It's like sleep being our most critical piece here. That might be helpful. Anxiety being a critical piece. And so I will, ask about it. I do not ask about it under kind of a substance abuse area, unless that's an issue, unless somebody comes in with their partner and their partner is too high all the time from morning to night, then it becomes a different kind of a clinical issue that you would address as you would, any other kind of substance use disorder issue, or refer to somebody. But I think it's part of conversation. And so I have to say, I predominantly see patients and family members who are affected by cancer. And so it is not a hard jump if I see something.
Yeah.
I also, as we all know, like, not everybody complains to their oncology care team as much as they should. And so we'll tough out the nausea and the insomnia in the interest of, like, I don't want to upset other people. And so I always ask about kind of symptoms, and it is within that kind of context. It's a great question, though.
It really is. And I actually think, and kudos to all of you for sort of being here to, be interested in the conversation. I think the biggest thing is to keep it on your mind
Yeah.
as one of the things that you think about, right? That's that, because I know I changed my practice over time where it was just nothing I
Yeah.
thought about. And so starting to even think about it will be the start of how you kind of naturally go into that space. And if
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, the
Yeah.
only other thing on the communication piece that I will say, and this is very much having nothing to do with cannabis and very much having my palliative doctor hat on, is like, I really think it's okay to say, like, I don't have all the answers here, but this, sort of putting yourself in the vulnerable space of like, I don't know the answers either, but this might be something. Like, have you ever thought about that, or what's your experience with that, right? Like, I often kind of put myself in that vulnerable space so that it doesn't feel like a patient has to be the vulnerable one.
So the end of the story is I didn't really bring up cannabis till the end because it was a first session and I wanted to know about her story, of course. And so at the end, we're talking like she's exhausted. And I said, have you ever kind of tried cannabis to sleep? And she said, and like this wouldn't have happened unless I asked. She said, yeah, she said, friends brought me some gummies like a year ago when this kind of started. And I took them a couple times and I'm like, okay, did that help? And she said, it's best I've slept all year. And I'm like, okay, so there's like a lost opportunity there, right? But she told herself a story that taking that would somehow disrupt her cancer therapy. And certainly that's a conversation with an oncologist, but it's interesting when you start, and
Oh, one other thing, thank you, Camilla, for reminding me of this. If you guys are looking for a resource, there is another entity out there called Realm of Caring, which is a group of medical professionals that are available over the phone to help guide patients very specifically, and just Google it, you'll get all the details there, but very specifically in the cannabis space. And it grew out of a pediatric patient and family, so they are very friendly.
And they have an academic bent, so it's legitimate, evidence-based, boundaried.
Hey, real quick, before we wrap up, there is a question about a specific resource called herbalcarerx.com. And the question essentially is, is this a reliable site? Do you have a comment on that?
Right now,
I've never heard of it, but I'm Googling it along with all of you. Herbal Care RX. So I'm betting it might be like adjacent to a medical dispensary. So this is a pot doc. That's what this is. And they might be good, and kind of balanced and guided. And they might kind of be a for-profit business. I don't know specifically about what they do, but
Right.
yeah.
So we are at the end of our time. This session, it was jam-packed with great information and interaction. So thanks, everyone. We want to send a special thank you to Greg Garber and Dr. Worster to be with us today. And thanks again to the audience for helping make this even more interesting with your questions. Just as a reminder, this session was recorded and will be available for viewing on CSC Zoom's Events Hub and our Learning and Training Program website through February 10th, 2025. PDF versions of the presentation materials, including slide decks and handouts, will be shared with attendees following this event. Please note that all session recordings and resources available after the event are for informational uses only and will not be eligible for CEs. If you wish to receive the one continuing ed credit from participating in this session, you must complete an online evaluation form, and the link to this form will be made available after every session, but please note that you will only need to fill it out once to claim credits. If you have questions about the CE activity, please contact Prime at the email shared in the chat. I think we are out. Thanks, guys. It was great.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you. We
Bye,
ran
guys. Have a
tight.
good day.
Take care.